came back to stand beside her. Wherever it went, it's not out there now. Nita let out an unhappy breath. Why should it be? Everything else has changed. She looked back at the helipad. The stairwell was still there, but its door had been ripped away and lay buckled on the gravel. The helipad itself had no design painted on it for a helicopter to center on when landing. The glass of the small building by the pad was smashed in some places and filmed all around. The building was full of rubble and trash, a ruin. Where are we? Nita said. The place we saw in the spell, Manhattan. But different. Nita chewed her lip nervously. Is this an alternate world, maybe? The next universe over? The World Gate was just set for a retrieval, but we jumped through. Maybe we messed up its workings. Carl said this one was easy to mess up. I wonder how much trouble you get in for busting a World Gate, Kit muttered. I think we're in enough trouble right now. We have to find the thing. See if you can find me the sun and the stars and the rest of the universe while you're at it, Fred said. He sounded truly miserable, much worse than when he had swallowed the pen. I don't know how long I can bear this silence. Kit stood silent for a moment, staring out at that grim, cold cityscape. There is a spell we can use to find it that doesn't need anything but words, he said. Good thing. We don't have much in the way of supplies. We'll need your help, though, Fred. Your claudication was connected to the World Gates when we went through. You can be used to trace it. Anything to get us out of this place, Fred said. Well, Nita said, let's find a place to get set up. The faint rattling noise of helicopter rotors interrupted her. She looked westward along the long axis of the roof, toward the dark, half-hidden blot that was Central Park, or another version of it. A small, flying shape came wheeling around the corner of a skyscraper a few blocks away and cruised steadily toward the roof where they stood, the sharp chatter of its blades ricocheting more and more loudly off the blank, dark faces of neighboring skyscrapers. We better get under cover, Kit said. Nita started for the stairwell, and Kit headed after her, but a bit more slowly. He kept throwing glances over his shoulder at the approaching chopper, both worried by it and interested in it. Nita looked over her shoulder, too, to tell him to hurry, and then realized how close the chopper was, how fast it was coming. A standard two-seat helicopter, wiry skeleton, glass bubble protecting the seats, oval doors on each side. But the bubble's glass was filmed over, except for the doors, which glittered oddly. They had a faceted look. No pilot could see out of that, Nita thought, confused. And the skids, the landing skids, are wrong somehow. The helicopter came sweeping over their heads, low, too low. Kit! Nita yelled. She spun around and tackled him, knocking him flat, as the skids made a lightning jab at the place where he had been a moment before, and hit the gravel with a screech of metal. The helicopter soared on past them, refolding its skids, not yet able to slow down from the speed of its first attack. The thunderous rattling of its rotors mixed with another sound, a high, frustrated shriek, like that of a predator that has missed its kill. And almost immediately they heard something else, too, an even higher-pitched squealing, ratchety and metallic, produced by several sources and seeming to come from inside the ruined glass shelter. Kit and Nita clutched at each other, getting a better look at the helicopter from behind as it swung around for another pass. The skids were doubled-back limbs of metal, like those of a praying mantis, cruelly clawed. Under what should have been the helicopter's bubble, sharp, dark mandibles worked hungrily, and as the chopper heeled over and came about, those faceted eyes looked at Kit and Nita, with the cold, businesslike glare reserved for helpless prey. "We're dead," Nita whispered. "Not yet," Kit gasped, staggering up again. "The stairwell!" Together, he and Nita ran for the stairs as the chopper creature arrowed across the rooftop at them. Nita was almost blind with terror. She knew now what had torn the door off the stairwell and doubted there was any way to keep that thing from getting them. They fell into the stairwell together. The chopper roared past again, not losing so much time in its turn this time, coming about to hover like a deadly dragonfly while positioning itself for another jab with those steel claws. Kit fell farther down the stairs than Nita did, hit his head against a wall, and lay moaning. Nita slid and scrabbled to a stop, then turned to see that huge, horrible face glaring into the stairwell, sighting on her for the jab. It was unreal. None of it could possibly be real. It was all a dream. And with the inane desperation of a dreamer in a nightmare, Nita felt for the only thing at hand, the Rowan rod, and slashed at the looming face with it. She was completely unprepared for the result. A whip of silver fire, the color of the full moon, cracked across the bubble face from the rod, which glowed in her hand. Screaming in pain and rage, the chopper creature backed up and away, but only a little. The razor-combed claws shot down at her. She slashed at them, too, and when the moonfire curled around them, the creature screamed again and pulled them back. "Kit!" she yelled, not daring to turn her back on those raging, ravenous eyes. "Kit! The antenna!" She heard him fumbling around in his pack as the hungry helicopter took another jab at her, and she whipped it again with fire. Quite suddenly, something fired past her ear, a bright, narrow line of blazing red light, the color of metal in the forge. The molten light struck the helicopter in the underbelly, splattering in bright, hot drops, and the answering scream was much more terrible this time. "It's a machine," Nita said, gasping. "Your department." "Great," Kit said, crawling up the stairs beside her. "How do you kill a helicopter?" But he braced one arm on the step just above his face, laid the antenna over it, and fired again. The chopper creature screeched again and swung away. Kit scrambled up to his feet, pressed himself flat against what remained of the crumbling doorway, pointed the antenna again. Red fire lanced out, followed by Nita's white as she dove back out into the stinging wind and thunder of rotors and slashed at the horror that hung and grabbed from midair. Gravel flew and stung. The wind lashed her face with her hair. The air was full of that ear-tearing metallic scream, but she kept slashing. White fire snapped and curled, and then from around the other side of the chopper creature there came a sharp crack as a bolt of Kit's hot light fired upward. The scream that followed made all the preceding ones sound faint. Nita wished she could drop the wand and cover her ears, but she didn't dare. And anyway, she was too puzzled by the creature's reaction. That shot hadn't hit anywhere on its body that she could see. Still screaming, it began to spin helplessly in a circle like a toy pinwheel. Kit had shattered the helicopter's tail rotor. It might still be airborne, but it couldn't fly straight or steer. Nita danced back from another jab of those legs, whipped the eyes again with the silver fire of the Rowan wand as they spun past her. From the other side there was another crack and a shattering sound, and the bubble head spinning past her again showed one faceted eye, now opaque, spider-webbed with cracks. The helicopter lurched and rose, trying to gain altitude and get away. Across the roof, Kit looked up, laid the antenna across his forearm again, took careful aim, fired. This time the molten line of light struck through the blurring main rotors. With a high, anguished, ringing snap, one rotor flew off and pinwheeled away almost too fast to see. The helicopter gave one last wild screech, bobbled up, then sideways, as if staggering through the air. "Get down!" Kit screamed at Nita, throwing himself on the ground. She did the same, covering her head with her arms and frantically gasping the syllables of the defense shield spell. The explosion shook everything and sent gravel flying to bounce off the hardened air around her like hail off a car roof. Jagged blade shards snapped and rang and shot in all directions. Only when the roaring and the wash of heat that followed it died down to quiet and flickering light did Nita dare to raise her head. The helicopter creature was a broken-backed wreck with oily flame licking through it. The eye that Kit had shattered stared blindly up at the dark sky from the edge of the helipad. The tail assembly, twisted and bent, lay half under the creature's body. The only sounds left were the wind and that shrill keening from the little glass building, now much muted. Nita rid herself of the shielding spell and got slowly to her feet. "Fred?" she whispered. A pale spark floated shakily through the air to perch on her shoulder. "Here," he said, sounding as tremulous as Nita felt. "Are you well?" She nodded, walked toward the wreck. Kit stood on the other side of it, his fist clenched on the antenna. He was shaking visibly. The sight of his terror made Nita's worse as she came to stand by him. "Kit," she said, fighting the urge to cry, and losing. Tears spilled out anyway. "This is not a nice place," she said. He gulped, leaking tears himself. "No," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It sure isn't." He looked over at the glass-walled building. "Yeah," Nita said, scrubbing at her face. "We better have a look." Slowly and carefully they approached the building, came to one collapsed wall, peered in. Nita held her wand high so they could see by its glow. Inside, hidden amid the trash and broken glass, was what seemed to be a rude nest built of scraps of metal and wire. In the nest were 3 baby helicopters, none more than 2 feet long. They stared fiercely at Kit and Nita from tiny, faceted eyes like their parents', and threatened with little jabbing forelegs, whirring with rotors too small to lift them yet. Sharing the nest with the fledglings was the partially stripped skeleton of a dog. Kit and Nita turned away together. "I think maybe we should go downstairs a little ways before we do that finding spell," Kit said, his voice still shaking. "If there's another of those things." "Yeah." They headed down the stairwell, to the door that in their own world had opened onto the elevator corridor. The two of them sat down, and Nita laid the Rowan wand in her lap so there would be light. The ceiling lights in the stairwell were out, and the place felt like the bottom of a hole. "Fred," Kit said, "how are you holding up?" Fred hung between them, his light flickering. "A little better than before. The silence is still very terrible, but at least you two are here." "We'll find you the sun, Fred," Nita said, wishing she was as sure as she was trying to sound. "Kit, which spell was it you were going to use?" Kit had his manual out. "At the bottom of page 318. It's a double. We read together." Nita got out her own book, paged through it. "McKillop's stricture? That's for keeping grass short." No. Kit leaned over to look at Nita's manual. "Huh. How about that? Our pages are different. Look under Isodics and Diochesis, the 4th one after the general introduction. Davidson's Minor Enthalpy." Nita riffled through some more pages. Evidently her book had more information than Kit's on the spells relating to growing things. Her suspicion about what their specialties were grew stronger. "Got it." She glanced through the spell. "Fred, you don't have to do anything, actually, but this is one of those spells that'll leave us blind to what's happening around here. Watch for us?" "Absolutely." "Okay," Kit said. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. They spoke together, slowly and carefully, matching cadence as they described the world gate and their own needs in the speech. The shadowy stairwell grew darker still, though this darkness seemed less hostile than what hung overhead, and in the deepening dimness, the walls around them slowly melted away. It seemed to Nita that she and Kit and the small bright point between them hung at a great height, unsupported, over a city built of ghosts and dreams. The buildings that had looked real and solid from the roof now seemed transparent skeletons, rearing up into the gloom of this place. Stone and steel and concrete were shadows, and gazing through them, down the length of the island, Nita saw again the 2 points of light that she and Kit had seen in the first spell.